In the vast expanse of the cosmos, where civilizations rise and fall like waves upon an endless shore, there exists a truth that even the most advanced species refuse to acknowledge. Sometimes the greatest power comes wrapped in the most unassuming package. They say that humans are weak, fragile creatures, barely worthy of notice in the galactic community. They laugh at our soft flesh, our short lifespans, our primitive technology, but they have never met Sarah Chen. While her classmates mock her quiet nature and awkward demeanor, while teachers overlook her potential, while the galaxy dismisses humanity as inconsequential, Sarah carries within her a secret that could reshape the very fabric of reality. She is not just human, she is something far more dangerous, something that ancient prophecies warned about, something that warring empires have been searching for across millennia. The girl who gets picked last for teams in physical education class is the same girl whose true power could crack planets in half. The teenager who eats lunch alone while enduring whispered insults is the living embodiment of humanity's hidden strength, a strength so profound that when it finally emerges, it will send shockwaves across every corner of the known universe. This is her story. This is how a mocked high school student became the most feared entity in galactic history. This is why they now speak her name in hushed, terrified whispers across 1,000 worlds. Welcome to the legend of Sarah Chen, the girl who taught the cosmos why you should never underestimate humanity. Sarah Chen pressed her back against the cold metal lockers, watching as Madison Torres and her group of friends approached with that familiar look of predatory amusement in their eyes. The hallway of New Geneva High Station buzzed with the usual pre-class chatter, but Sarah could feel the attention shifting toward her like a spotlight she never wanted. "Look what we have here," Madison said, her voice carrying that sweet venom that had become as familiar to Sarah as her own heartbeat. "Little Sarah, all alone again. Where are your friends?" "Oh wait, I forgot you don't have any." The group laughed, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She clutched her data pad closer to her chest, wishing she could somehow disappear into the station's hull plating. New Geneva High Station was one of the premier educational facilities in the Sol system, orbiting Jupiter's moon Europa. But even here, among the best and brightest human students, she remained invisible except when she became a target. "I heard her mom got demoted again at the Colonial Administration," whispered Jessica Park, loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe that's why Sarah's clothes always look like they came from the recycling center. Sarah's jaw tightened. Her mother worked 18-hour shifts, maintaining atmospheric systems on various human colonies. And yes, the family struggled financially, but they were honest struggles. Unlike Madison's family, who had built their wealth through questionable mining contracts in the asteroid belt. "Leave me alone," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the station's life support systems. Madison stepped closer, her perfectly styled hair catching the artificial sunlight from the corridor's solar simulators. "What was that?" "I couldn't hear you over the sound of your pathetic existence." Something flickered in Sarah's chest, a warm sensation that she had been experiencing more frequently lately. It felt like electricity running through her veins, but she pushed it down, the way she had learned to do since childhood. Her grandmother had always warned her about the strange feelings, the dreams of vast spaces and cosmic energies, telling her to keep them hidden, to never let anyone know about the oddities that seemed to follow the Chen family line. "I said leave me alone," Sarah repeated, this time with more force. Madison's eyes narrowed. She was taller than Sarah by several inches, her family's genetic enhancements obvious in her perfect features and athletic build. Most of the wealthy families on the station could afford minor genetic modifications for their children: enhanced intelligence, improved physical capabilities, better disease resistance. Sarah's family could barely afford basic medical care, let alone genetic improvements. Or what? "You'll cry to your mommy?" "Oh wait, she's probably halfway across the system scrubbing air filters on some backwater colony." Madison's friends snickered, and Sarah felt that warmth in her chest growing stronger. The bell chimed for first period, but nobody moved. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the entertainment of watching the station's most unpopular student get humiliated again. Sarah recognized most of them children of diplomats, military officers, corporate executives, and colonial governors, the elite of human society, destined for positions of power and influence across the Sol system and beyond. And then there was her, the daughter of a maintenance worker and a deceased xenoarchaeologist father she barely remembered. You know what I heard? Madison continued, clearly enjoying her audience. I heard that your dad wasn't even really human. That's why he spent so much time digging around alien ruins. Maybe that's why you're so weird, Sarah. Maybe you're some kind of freak hybrid. The comment hit like a physical blow. Sarah's father had died when she was 7, during an archaeological expedition to study precursor ruins on Kepler 442b. She had only fragments of memories, his gentle voice reading her bedtime stories, his calloused hands showing her how to identify different types of star formations, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the mysteries hidden in ancient alien artifacts. The warmth in her chest suddenly blazed into something much hotter. The station's lights flickered almost imperceptibly, and Sarah felt her vision blur at the edges. Around her, she could sense something vast and incomprehensible, like standing at the edge of an infinite ocean while feeling its depths calling to her. My father was a hero, she said, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. He died trying to understand our place in the universe. What has your family ever done except exploit other people? Madison's face flushed with anger. How dare you? The lights flickered again, more noticeably this time. A few students glanced up nervously at the ceiling panels. Sarah felt the strange energy coursing through her more strongly than ever before, as if some sleeping giant was beginning to stir in her DNA. Her grandmother's warnings echoed in her mind, but the humiliation and anger were overriding her caution. Is there a problem here? The voice belonged to Mr. Harrison, their xenobiology teacher, a stern man in his 50s who had served as a colonial marine before transitioning to education. His presence immediately caused the crowd to begin dispersing. Madison's expression shifted to one of innocent concern. No problem, Mr. Harrison. Sarah was just telling us about her family. I was trying to be supportive. Mr. Harrison's eyes moved between the girls, clearly not believing Madison's performance but lacking evidence to contradict it. Miss Chen? Are you all right? Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. The energy inside her was beginning to settle, but she could still feel it humming beneath her skin like a barely contained storm. Yes, sir. Just discussing our upcoming assignment. Good. Everyone, to your classes. The Galactic Relations exam is tomorrow, and I expect you all to be prepared. Mr. Harrison's gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment longer, something like concern flickering in his expression, before he continued down the corridor. As the students scattered, Madison leaned close to Sarah's ear. This isn't over, freak. You think you're special, but you're nothing. You'll always be nothing. Sarah watched Madison and her friends walk away, their laughter echoing off the corridor walls. She stood alone by her locker, feeling the familiar mixture of shame and rage that had become her constant companion. But underneath those familiar emotions, something else was growing, a sense that Madison was very, very wrong about what Sarah actually was. The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes and sidelong glances. Sarah kept her head down during galactic history, where they studied the rise and fall of various alien civilizations. She remained silent during xenobiology, even though she knew more about non-human species than most of her classmates, a legacy of her father's research. And she endured the whispers during lunch, eating alone while surrounded by hundreds of other students. It was during her final class of the day, advanced physics, that things took an interesting turn. Professor Williams was discussing theoretical energy manipulation when she posed a question to the class. Can anyone tell me why the precursor ruins seem to respond to certain individuals but not others? We know they built their technology to interface with biological entities. But what determines compatibility? Several hands shot up around the room. Madison, predictably, was first to speak when called upon. Obviously, it has to do with intelligence levels and genetic optimization. The precursors were clearly an advanced species, so they would have programmed their systems to recognize superior beings. Professor Williams nodded politely but didn't seem satisfied with the answer. An interesting theory, Miss Torres. But genetic optimization is a recent human development. The ruins are millions of years old, yet there are records of unmodified humans activating precursor technology. Anyone else? Sarah found herself raising her hand before she could think better of it. The professor looked surprised. Sarah rarely spoke in class but nodded for her to continue. Maybe it's not about genetic superiority, Sarah said. feeling every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her. Maybe it's about compatibility on a deeper level. The precursors might have built their technology to recognize something fundamental about consciousness itself, something that exists regardless of genetic modification. Professor Williams leaned forward with interest. Go on. Sarah felt her confidence growing as she spoke. My father's research suggested that the precursors weren't just technologically advanced, they were evolutionarily advanced. They might have reached a state where individual consciousness could interface directly with the fundamental forces of the universe. If that's true, then their technology would respond to beings who share that potential, regardless of their current physical development. The classroom was completely silent. Even Madison looked stunned that the girl she tormented daily had just delivered what sounded like a graduate-level analysis of xenoarchaeology. Professor Williams smiled. Excellent insight, Miss Chen. Your father would be proud of that analysis. It aligns with some of the most recent theories coming out of the Xenoarchaeological Institute on Mars. Sarah felt a warm glow that had nothing to do with the strange energy she had been experiencing lately. For the first time in months, she had spoken up in class and been recognized for her intelligence rather than mocked for her social awkwardness. But as the class ended and students began filing out, she caught Madison's expression of pure hatred and realized she had just painted an even bigger target on her back. The walk home through the station's residential sectors gave Sarah time to think. New Geneva High Station was essentially a small city in space, with shopping districts, parks, residential areas, and even a central plaza with artificial weather patterns. Her family's apartment was in the lower income section, where the artificial gravity was slightly weaker and the view screens showed recycled images instead of real-time exterior feeds. As she entered their small two-bedroom unit, Sarah found her mother, Dr. Lin Chen, hunched over a stack of atmospheric regulation reports at their tiny kitchen table. Her mother looked exhausted, her black hair streaked with premature gray from years of stress and overwork. How was school? Her mother asked without looking up from her work. The usual, Sarah replied, not wanting to burden her mother with the details of Madison's latest harassment campaign. Lin finally looked up, studying her daughter's face with the sharp perception that had made her an excellent atmospheric engineer. Sarah, we need to talk. Something in her mother's tone made Sarah pause halfway to her room. About what? I received a call from Professor Williams today. She wanted to discuss your performance in her class, but more specifically, she wanted to know about your father's research. Lynn set down her stylus and gestured for Sarah to sit across from her. She said you demonstrated an unusually sophisticated understanding of precursor technology. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. I was just remembering some of Dad's old research notes. Sarah, your father's research was classified at the highest levels of colonial command. There were no notes for you to remember. Lynn's expression was serious, almost frightened. What's really happening with you lately? The power fluctuations in the apartment, the way electronic devices seem to malfunction around you when you're upset, these aren't normal teenage problems. The weight of keeping secrets suddenly felt overwhelming. Sarah looked at her mother, seeing the worry and fear in her eyes, and made a decision. Sometimes I feel like there's something inside me, she said quietly. Something that wants to come out. When Madison was bullying me today, the lights flickered, and I felt this energy running through me like electricity. It's been happening more often lately. Lynn was quiet for a long moment, staring at her daughter with an expression Sarah couldn't read. Then she got up and went to her bedroom, returning with a small metal box that Sarah had never seen before. Your father left this for you, Lynn said, placing the box on the table between them, with instructions to give it to you when you started experiencing what he called the awakening. Sarah stared at the box, which was covered in symbols that looked almost familiar, as if she had seen them in dreams. What's inside? I don't know. Your father said the box would only open for you, and only when you were ready. Lynn's voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah, before your father died, he told me that you weren't entirely human. He said you were something much more important, something that certain people would kill for if they knew what you really were. The box seemed to pulse with its own inner light as Sarah reached for it. The moment her fingers touched the metal surface, the symbols began to glow, and the lid opened with a soft hiss. Inside, nestled in foam that looked like it was made from crystallized starlight, was a small pendant on a chain. The pendant itself appeared to be a fragment of some kind of crystal, but it pulsed with the same rhythm as Sarah's heartbeat. As soon as she touched the pendant, Sarah's world exploded into visions. She saw her father standing in a vast chamber filled with precursor technology, the walls covered in the same symbols that had been on the box. She saw him placing his hand on a massive crystalline structure, and she felt his shock and wonder as the ancient machinery responded to his touch. But more than that, she felt his realization that the technology wasn't responding to him at all. It was responding to something inside him, something that he would pass on to his daughter. The visions shifted, and she saw herself, but older, standing on the bridge of a massive starship while alien delegates bowed before her. She saw worlds being transformed by her will, and cosmic energies bending to her command. She saw herself facing down threats that could destroy entire civilizations, and she saw the fear in her enemies' eyes when they realized what they were truly facing. And then she saw something else, a darkness spreading across the galaxy, consuming worlds and civilizations in its path. She saw humanity's colonies falling one by one, and she felt the desperate need to become strong enough to stop it. The visions ended as abruptly as they had begun, leaving Sarah gasping and clutching the pendant. Her mother was standing over her, looking terrified. "Sarah, what happened? You were glowing." Sarah looked down at herself and saw that she was indeed surrounded by a faint luminescence, as if starlight was emanating from her skin. The pendant felt warm against her palm, and she could sense vast reserves of power just waiting to be accessed. "Mom," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she had just experienced. "I think I know why the precursor technology responds to certain people, and I think I know what Dad really discovered in those ruins." Lynn sat down heavily, suddenly looking much older than her 42 years. "Tell me." Sarah held up the pendant, watching the way its inner light seemed to pulse in harmony with the station's power grid. The precursors didn't just build technology that could interface with biological entities. They built technology that could recognize their own descendants. Dad wasn't just an archaeologist, Mom. He was part precursor, and so am I. The implications hung in the air between them like a physical weight. If Sarah was right, it meant that humanity's greatest archaeological mystery was also sitting in their kitchen, disguised as an awkward teenage girl who got picked on at school. It also meant that the power she had been feeling, the energy that made electronics malfunction and lights flicker, was just the beginning. If the visions were true, then the girl who couldn't defend herself against high school bullies was destined to become something that could reshape the galaxy itself. But first, she had to survive tomorrow's classes, and something told her that Madison Torres was about to become the least of her problems. The next morning brought chaos to New Geneva High Station in the form of an unscheduled arrival. Sarah was walking to her first class when the station's intercom crackled to life with an announcement that made her blood run cold. "Attention all students and faculty. We have received clearance for an inspection visit from the Galactic Compliance Authority. All classes will continue as normal, but please be aware that GCA representatives will be observing various educational activities throughout the day." Sarah stopped dead in the corridor, her hand instinctively moving to the pendant hidden beneath her uniform shirt. The Galactic Compliance Authority was ostensibly a peacekeeping organization that mediated disputes between different species. But Sarah knew from her father's research that they were much more than that. They were hunters, specifically tasked with identifying and containing individuals or technologies that could threaten the balance of power in the galaxy. The fact that they were here, the day after her awakening, could not be a coincidence. "Sarah," Madison's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. "Perfect timing. I wanted to continue our conversation from yesterday." Sarah turned to find Madison approaching with her usual entourage, but this time there was something different in her expression. Instead of the casual cruelty Sarah had come to expect, there was something calculating, almost predatory. "I don't have time for this," Sarah said, trying to move past the group toward her classroom. Madison stepped sideways, blocking her path. "Oh, but I think you do. You see, I had the most interesting conversation with my father last night. He's Deputy Colonial Administrator for this sector, as you know. And he told me something fascinating about your little family." The warmth in Sarah's chest began to build again. But this time she was more aware of it, more in control. She could feel the pendant pulsing against her skin in rhythm with the energy flowing through her. "My father told me that your dad wasn't just any archaeologist," Madison continued, her voice taking on that sweet, poisonous tone. He was working on classified projects for Colonial Command, projects that got him killed when he discovered things he shouldn't have. "You don't know what you're talking about," Sarah replied, but she could feel her control beginning to slip. Madison smiled, an expression that held no warmth whatsoever. "Don't I? Because according to my father's files, Dr. Chen's death wasn't an accident. He was eliminated because he found something in those precursor ruins that threatened the established order. Something that certain people would pay very well to get their hands on." The implications of Madison's words hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Madison's father had access to classified files about her father's death, it meant that the colonial administration was involved in whatever had killed him. And if Madison was bringing this up now, it meant she knew something about Sarah herself. "You're lying," Sarah said. But even as she spoke, she realized that Madison's revelation explained a lot of things that had never made sense about her father's death. "Am I? Then explain why your mother got transferred to the most menial job in the colonial administration right after your father died. Explain why you've been under surveillance your entire life. And explain why the GCA just happened to show up here the day after you finally started manifesting your abilities." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you talking about?" Madison leaned closer, and Sarah could see genuine malice in her eyes. "I'm talking about the fact that you're not human, Sarah. Not entirely. And there are people who are very interested in finding out exactly what you are." The pendant against Sarah's chest suddenly blazed with heat, and she felt power surge through her unlike anything she had experienced before. The lights in the corridor began to flicker, and she could hear the subtle hum of the station's systems beginning to fluctuate. "Madison, step away from Miss Chen immediately." The voice belonged to Mr. Harrison, their xenobiology teacher, but his tone was sharper and more authoritative than Sarah had ever heard it. Madison turned with her practiced innocent expression. "We were just having a friendly conversation, Mr. Harrison." "No, you weren't." Harrison moved between the girls, and Sarah noticed for the first time that he was wearing some kind of device on his wrist that was blinking with a soft red light. "Miss Torres, report to Principal Davidson's office immediately. Miss Chen, come with me." Madison's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of anger and something that looked almost like fear. "You can't order me around. Your father has no authority here when it comes to student safety," Harrison interrupted. "Office." Now, as Madison and her friends reluctantly moved toward the administrative section, Harrison placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Are you all right?" Sarah nodded, though she could still feel energy crackling beneath her skin like contained lightning. "What's happening, Mr. Harrison? Why are the GCA here?" Harrison's expression was grim as he guided her toward an empty classroom. "Because someone has been monitoring your family for years, Sarah. And yesterday, when you demonstrated those insights about precursor technology, you triggered some very sophisticated surveillance systems." He locked the classroom door behind them and activated what looked like a privacy shield, a small device that would prevent electronic surveillance from penetrating the room. "Mr. Harrison, I don't understand. My name isn't actually Harrison," he said, his voice taking on a different accent, something that sounded vaguely European. "My real name is Dr. Eric Volkov, and I was a colleague of your father's before his death. I've been watching over you for the past 8 years, waiting for this day." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. "Watching over me? But you're a teacher." "I'm a xenoarchaeologist and former colonial intelligence operative," Volkov replied. "Your father and I discovered something in the precursor ruins on Kepler 442b that changed everything we thought we knew about human origins. We discovered that humanity wasn't just another species that evolved naturally, we were engineered, Sarah. Created by the precursors as a failsafe against something they saw coming." The pendant was growing warmer against Sarah's skin, and she could feel it resonating with Volkov's words. "What kind of failsafe? The precursors weren't the first galactic civilization, and they won't be the last. Throughout the universe's history, there have been cycles of creation and destruction, civilizations rising to incredible heights before being consumed by something called the void hunger. The precursors realized they were going to be next, so they created humanity as a weapon, a species that could channel cosmic energy in ways that no other known life form can. Volkov activated a holographic display that showed a complex diagram of what looked like DNA strands interwoven with energy patterns. Most humans carry dormant precursor genetic markers, but in a few bloodlines, the markers are active. Your father's lineage was one of them, which is why he could activate precursor technology. But your mother's family carries markers too, from a completely different precursor faction. The combination of those two bloodlines in you has created something unprecedented. Sarah looked down at her hands, watching small sparks of energy dance between her fingers. What am I? You're what the precursors called a nexus, a being capable of channeling the fundamental forces that bind the universe together. In the ancient texts, they're described as individuals who can reshape reality at the quantum level, who can command energy on a cosmic scale, and who can stand against threats that would destroy entire civilizations. The magnitude of what Volkov was telling her was almost impossible to process. Sarah thought about her awkward teenage life, her struggles with bullies, her family's financial problems, and tried to reconcile it with the idea that she was some kind of cosmic weapon. If all this is true, she said slowly, then why haven't I been able to defend myself against Madison and her friends? Why do I still feel like just a scared kid who doesn't fit in anywhere? Volkov's expression softened. Because your abilities are tied to your emotional and psychological development, Sarah. The precursors designed it that way as a safeguard. A nexus can't access their full power until they've developed the wisdom and emotional maturity to use it responsibly. That's why you've only been experiencing minor manifestations until now. Then what changed yesterday? Your father's pendant. It was designed to accelerate the awakening process when you were ready, but it also sends out a signal that can be detected by those who know what to look for. Volkov's expression grew worried. The GCA has devices that can track precursor energy signatures. That's why they're here. As if summoned by his words, the classroom door chimed with an override code. Volkov quickly deactivated the privacy shield, just as the door slid open to reveal 3 figures in the distinctive black uniforms of the Galactic Compliance Authority. The leader was a tall, thin, humanoid, with pale blue skin and silver eyes, a Vorthan, one of the galaxy's most technologically advanced species. Behind him stood a human woman with the kind of genetic enhancements that spoke of serious military augmentation, and a third figure whose species Sarah didn't recognize but who radiated an aura of barely contained violence. Mr. Harrison, the Vorthan said in a voice like silk over steel, please excuse the interruption. I am Compliance Officer Gentar, and I need to speak with Miss Chen about some irregularities in our scanning systems. Volkov stepped protectively in front of Sarah. I'm not sure what you mean, officer. Miss Chen is just a student. Gentar's silver eyes focused on Sarah with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Our sensors detected a significant energy disturbance in this sector yesterday evening, followed by another smaller spike approximately 10 minutes ago. The signature is consistent with Class Omega phenomena. Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest. Class Omega was the GCA's designation for technology or abilities that could threaten galactic stability. It was also the classification that carried an automatic termination order. I think there's been some mistake, Volkov said carefully. This is an educational facility. The only energy sources here are standard fusion reactors and life support systems. The human woman stepped forward, her hand resting on what looked like a weapon. Mr. Harrison, our scans indicate that you're carrying forged identification documents. Your real name is Dr. Eric Volkov, and you're wanted for questioning in connection with the death of Dr. James Chen 8 years ago. Sarah felt the pendant against her chest suddenly blaze with heat, and power surged through her body like a tidal wave. The lights in the classroom began to strobe, and she could feel the station's systems responding to her emotional state. Sarah, you need to calm down, Volkov said urgently, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Gentar's eyes widened as his scanning device began emitting urgent warning signals. Class Omega signature confirmed. Initiating containment protocol. The third alien moved with inhuman speed, producing a device that began emitting some kind of energy field designed to suppress paranormal abilities. But as the field reached Sarah, something unexpected happened. Instead of suppressing her power, it seemed to amplify it. Sarah felt her consciousness expand outward, touching the station's computer systems, the life support networks, even the quantum mechanics of the artificial gravity generators. For a moment, She could feel the heartbeat of everyone aboard the station, could sense the vast cosmic forces that held the solar system together. And in that expanded awareness, she sensed something else, a darkness at the edge of human space, consuming everything in its path and heading directly toward Earth. The visions her father's pendant had shown her weren't prophecies of some distant future. They were warnings about something that was already happening. "The void hunger," she whispered, and as she spoke the words, every electronic system in the room shut down completely. In the sudden darkness and silence, Gentar's voice was filled with a terror that Sarah had never heard from a GCA officer before. Impossible. The Nexus project was theoretical. There were never any successful subjects. Volkov's reply was grim. "There was one, and she's standing right in front of you." The lights came back on slowly, emergency power systems struggling to compensate for whatever Sarah had done to the main grid. When vision returned, she found all 3 GCA officers staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to terror. "Miss Chen," Gentar said, his voice carefully controlled, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation. There are things happening in the galaxy that you need to know about, and abilities you possess that you don't yet understand." Sarah looked around the room, seeing the scorch marks her power had left on the walls, the way the very air seemed to shimmer with residual energy. She thought about Madison's threats, about her father's death, about the darkness she had sensed at the edge of human space. "You're right," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "But first, I want to know exactly who killed my father, and why, and I want to know what this void hunger is, and how long we have before it reaches Earth." Gentar exchanged glances with his companions, and Sarah could see them making rapid calculations about threat levels and containment possibilities. What they were seeing was a scared teenager in a school uniform, but what their instruments were telling them was something that could potentially destroy their entire civilization. "Very well," Gentar said finally, "but this conversation cannot take place here. There are too many variables, too many people who might get hurt if your abilities manifest unexpectedly." "Where then?" "There's a GCA research vessel in orbit around Saturn. It's equipped with containment systems that can handle Class Omega phenomena, and it has access to classified databases that contain information about your father's work." Sarah looked at Volkov, who nodded grimly. "It's the best option we have, Sarah, and if they're right about the void hunger, then we need access to those databases." The decision felt like stepping off a cliff into empty space, but Sarah realized she had passed the point where she could pretend to be a normal teenager. Whatever she was, whatever destiny awaited her, it was bigger than high school bullies and family financial problems. "All right," she said, "but I want my mother to know where I'm going, and I want guarantees that my family will be protected." Gentar inclined his head formally. "Agreed. But Miss Chen, I must warn you, once you leave this station with us, there will be no going back to your old life. The galaxy is about to learn that the Nexus project wasn't just a theoretical possibility, and that knowledge will change everything." As they prepared to leave the classroom, Sarah caught sight of herself in the window's reflection. For just a moment, she looked different, older, more serious, surrounded by a faint aura of starlight. She was still Sarah Chen, the awkward teenager from New Geneva High Station, but she was also something much more dangerous. And the time for hiding was officially over. The GCA research vessel Determination hung in Saturn's shadow like a sleek predator, its hull black against the cosmic void and bristling with sensors that could detect energy signatures from halfway across the solar system. As Sarah's transport shuttle approached the docking bay, she pressed her face to the viewport and tried to comprehend how much her life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday, her biggest concern had been surviving Madison's bullying. Now she was aboard a shuttle with 3 alien officers who believed she was some kind of cosmic weapon, heading toward a conversation that would apparently determine the fate of human civilization. The pendant her father had left her pulsed warmly against her chest, seeming to resonate with the advanced technology surrounding them. Through the shuttle's hull, she could feel the massive energies contained within the research vessel. Fusion reactors, quantum computers, weapon systems that could level continents. But more than that, she could sense something else aboard the ship. Something that felt almost familiar. "Miss Chen," Officer Gentar said from the seat across from her, "I need to prepare you for what you're about to see. The Determination contains artifacts and data that are classified at levels above most government clearances. Some of what you learn today will be disturbing." Sarah nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. Beside her, Dr. Volkov. She was still having trouble thinking of him as anyone other than Mr. Harrison was reviewing files on a secure tablet that Gentar had provided during the journey. "Eric," she said quietly, "what exactly did you and my father discover in those ruins?" Volkov looked up from his reading, his expression troubled. "We found a record, Sarah, a complete history of what the precursors called the Great Cycle. Every 65 million years, something emerges from the space between galaxies and consumes all advanced civilization in this region of the universe. The dinosaurs weren't killed by an asteroid, they were the previous iteration's attempt to create a species that could resist the void hunger." The shuttle shuddered slightly as it passed through the Determination's defensive screens. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the docking bay opening like a mechanical flower, revealing a space large enough to hold a small city. "But the dinosaurs failed," she said, putting together the pieces of a puzzle that was vast beyond comprehension. "They failed because they were purely biological," Zuntar interjected. "The void hunger feeds on consciousness itself, growing stronger as it consumes the thoughts and dreams and hopes of sentient beings. Physical strength, even on a massive scale, is irrelevant against such a threat." The shuttle settled onto the landing platform with barely a whisper, artificial gravity generators smoothly transitioning between the vessel's systems. As they disembarked, Sarah was struck by the scale of the facility around them. The docking bay alone was larger than New Geneva High Station, and it was just one small section of a ship that stretched for kilometers. This way, the human officer, Commander Torres, Sarah had learned during the journey, gestured toward a transport platform that would take them deeper into the vessel. As they rode the transport through corridors lined with displays showing star charts and energy readings, Sarah noticed something odd. "Why does this ship feel familiar? I've never been on a GCA vessel before, but it's like I've been here in dreams." Gentar and Commander Torres exchanged glances. "That's because approximately 40% of this ship's technology is derived from precursor designs," Gentar explained. "Your genetic heritage allows you to interface with those systems on a subconscious level. You're essentially sensing technology that was built by your ancestors." The transport stopped at what appeared to be the ship's central hub, a vast chamber with a ceiling that stretched up beyond sight. In the center of the chamber stood something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat, a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with the same rhythm as the pendant around her neck. "What is that?" she whispered. "The Nexus core," Volkov replied, awe evident in his voice. "We found fragments of it in the Kepler 442b ruins, but we never imagined the GCA had managed to reconstruct a full-sized version." Commander Torres led them toward the crystal, which towered above them like a geometric mountain. "The core is how we've been monitoring Nexus candidates across human space for the past decade. It resonates with individuals carrying the specific genetic markers we've been looking for." "You mean you've been watching other people like me?" "We've been watching their families," Gentar corrected. "You're the first confirmed Nexus activation in recorded history. The others were all eliminated before they could manifest their abilities." The casual way he said it made Sarah's blood run cold. "Eliminated? You mean murdered?" "We mean protected," Commander Torres said quickly. "The previous candidates weren't ready, Sarah. If they had awakened prematurely, without proper training and support, they could have accidentally destroyed entire star systems. The decision was made to prevent that possibility." Sarah felt power building in her chest again, responding to her outrage and fear. Around the chamber, lights began to flicker, and she could hear the subtle hum of systems starting to fluctuate. "You killed children," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "You killed kids because they might someday develop abilities you couldn't control." The Nexus core suddenly blazed with light, resonating with Sarah's emotions. Throughout the chamber, holographic displays began activating, showing star charts and energy readings that shifted and changed in response to her presence. "Sarah, you need to calm down," Volkov said urgently. "If you lose control here, you could damage systems that are keeping this ship together." But Sarah was beyond listening to warnings about system damage. The knowledge that there had been others like her, other children who had been murdered before they could understand what they were, filled her with a rage that made her earlier anger at Madison seem like a minor annoyance. "How many?" she demanded, turning to face Juntar directly. "How many children did you kill?" 7 confirmed candidates over the past 15 years, Gentar replied, apparently deciding that honesty was his best option. But Sarah, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, Sarah interrupted. You're so afraid of what a nexus might do that you murder children to prevent the possibility. But you kept me alive because you needed me, didn't you? Because something's coming that even the GCA can't handle. The nexus core pulsed brighter, and throughout the chamber, previously inactive systems began coming online. Sarah could feel her consciousness expanding outward, touching computer networks and sensor arrays that spanned the entire ship. The void hunger reached the outer colonies 3 days ago, Commander Torres said quietly. We lost contact with the research stations around Proxima Centauri first, then the mining colonies in the Alpha Centauri system. As of this morning, we've lost 17 entire star systems. The weight of that revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. 17 star systems meant billions of people, entire civilizations erased as if they had never existed. The void entities consume all biological matter they encounter, Gentar continued. But more than that, they absorb the consciousness, the memories, the very essence of every sentient being they touch. Each world they devour makes them stronger, more intelligent, more capable of adapting to our defenses. Sarah felt the fight go out of her as the magnitude of the threat became clear. Her anger at the GCA's actions was still burning, but it was overshadowed by a deeper horror. How long do we have? At their current rate of expansion, they'll reach Earth in approximately 6 weeks, Volkov said, consulting his tablet. Unless something stops them or slows them down. Something like a nexus, Sarah said, understanding finally dawning. The precursor records indicate that a fully awakened nexus can manipulate the fundamental forces that hold matter together, Gentar explained. In theory, such an individual could disrupt the void hunger's ability to consume consciousness, essentially starving them of their primary food source. Sarah looked up at the massive crystal towering above them, feeling its resonance with the power building inside her. In theory, but you've never actually tested it, have you? Because you killed all the other potential candidates before they could develop their abilities. The admission hung in the air between them like an accusation. Finally, Commander Torres spoke. You're right. We've been operating on theoretical models and ancient records. Until now, we've never had a confirmed nexus to work with. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. So I'm not just a weapon you've been saving for a special occasion. I'm an experiment. You have no idea if I can actually do what these records claim. The core responded to you the moment you came aboard, Gentar pointed out. That suggests a level of compatibility that none of our simulations predicted. As if responding to the mention of its name, the Nexus core pulsed even brighter, and Sarah felt a sudden influx of information flooding her mind. Images, data streams, star charts showing the progression of something dark and hungry moving through space toward human colonies. But mixed in with the tactical information were other things, memories that weren't her own, belonging to people who had lived millions of years ago. She saw the last days of the precursor civilization, watched their desperate attempts to create a defense against the approaching darkness. She felt their pain as they realized they wouldn't survive to see if their plan worked. And she saw something else. Something that made her understanding of her own nature shift fundamentally. I'm not just a weapon, she said, her voice filled with wonder and terror. I'm a key. The precursors didn't create the Nexus project to fight the void hunger directly. They created it to unlock something else entirely. Volkov looked up sharply. What do you mean? Sarah gestured to the displays around them, which were now showing complex energy patterns that seemed to extend beyond normal space-time. The void hunger isn't the real threat. It's a symptom. There's something else, something that exists in the spaces between realities, and it's been feeding on consciousness across the universe for billions of years. The entities that destroyed the precursors, that are coming for us now, they're just extensions of that larger intelligence. How do you know this? Commander Torres demanded. Because the core isn't just showing me tactical data, Sarah replied, her consciousness still partially merged with the ancient technology. It's showing me the complete picture. The cycle doesn't end when the void hunger finishes consuming this galaxy. It starts over with a new one. This entity, this thing that exists outside normal space, has been doing this since the beginning of time. Gentar's silver eyes were wide with something approaching panic. If that's true, then conventional resistance is meaningless. Even if we could destroy the void hunger entities in this galaxy, the source intelligence would just create new ones. Exactly, Sarah said, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders. That's why the precursors created the Nexus Project, not to fight the symptoms, but to address the source. A fully awakened Nexus can theoretically access the spaces between realities, the dimensional gaps where this entity exists. The implications of what she was saying were staggering. It meant that her awakening wasn't just about saving humanity or even the galaxy. It was about confronting something that threatened the existence of consciousness itself throughout the universe. The question, she continued, looking around at the faces surrounding her, is whether I can actually become what the precursors intended, or whether I'll just be another failed experiment that gets 17 star systems worth of people killed while I figure it out. The Nexus core pulsed once more, and in its light, Sarah could see reflected the faces of beings who had died millions of years ago, placing their faith in a plan they would never see completed. The weight of their hope, combined with the knowledge of what was at stake, was almost overwhelming. But underneath the fear and uncertainty, she felt something else, growing a determination that surprised her with its intensity. Madison Torres and her high school problems seemed incredibly distant now, as insignificant as childhood games in the face of cosmic horror. She was still Sarah Chen, the awkward teenager who got picked on at school, but she was also the inheritor of a legacy that stretched back to the dawn of consciousness in the universe, and the only hope for ensuring that the light of awareness would continue to shine in the face of infinite darkness. The real test, she realized, wasn't whether she could access the power the precursors had designed into her genetic structure. The real test was whether she could do so while remaining human enough to remember what she was fighting for. The training chamber aboard the Determination was unlike anything Sarah had ever imagined. The walls, floor, and ceiling were composed of the same crystalline material as the Nexus core, but arranged in complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow in response to her presence. Floating throughout the space were holographic displays showing energy readings, biometric data, and what appeared to be real-time scans of her genetic structure. The chamber is designed to contain and channel Class Omega energy manifestations, Gentar explained as he made final adjustments to the monitoring systems. Theoretically, you could release enough power in here to level a city without damaging the ship or injuring anyone outside. Sarah stood in the center of the chamber, wearing a specialized suit that was covered in sensors and energy regulators. The pendant her father had left her was now exposed, hanging outside the suit where its energy signature could be monitored and analyzed. Theoretically, she repeated, noting the uncertainty in the Vorthan's voice. Has anyone ever actually tested the chamber's limits? Commander Torres, monitoring the proceedings from a heavily shielded control room, answered through the communication system. No, we've never had a subject capable of generating Class Omega energy levels. Most of our testing has been done with simulations and scaled-down versions of precursor technology. Dr. Volkov was reviewing readouts on a tablet, his expression deeply concerned. Sarah, I want you to understand what we're asking of you. The precursor records indicate that Nexus awakening is an irreversible process. Once you begin accessing your full potential, there's no going back to being a normal human. The weight of that statement settled over Sarah like a heavy cloak. She thought about her mother, probably working a double shift right now to maintain atmospheric systems on some distant colony, unaware that her daughter was about to potentially sacrifice her humanity to save the galaxy. What will happen to me? She asked quietly. Gentar consulted his instruments before responding. According to our analysis of the genetic markers, full awakening will fundamentally alter your consciousness. You'll retain your memories and personality, but your perception of reality will expand to include dimensional spaces and energy frequencies that normal humans cannot comprehend. Will I still be me? That, Volkov said honestly, is something we simply don't know. No one has ever successfully completed the awakening process. Through the chamber's observation windows, Sarah could see technicians monitoring dozens of different systems, recording every aspect of what was about to happen. She realized that regardless of the outcome, she was about to become either humanity's greatest hope or its most tragic failure, and that either way, her story would be studied and analyzed for generations. The entities have reached the Ross 128 system, Commander Torres announced, her voice tense. We lost contact with the colonies there approximately 1 hour ago. At their current rate of advancement, they'll reach the Sol system in 4 weeks and 3 days. The countdown was accelerating. Whatever Sarah was going to become, it needed to happen soon. "I'm ready," she said, though the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what lay ahead. "Remember," Gentar said, "the key is not to fight the transformation, but to guide it." The precursor records emphasize that resistance during awakening can result in catastrophic instability. Sarah closed her eyes and placed her hand on the pendant, feeling its warmth spreading through her body. Around her, the crystalline chamber began to resonate, harmonizing with the energy signature of her genetic inheritance. At first, nothing seemed to change. She felt the familiar warmth building in her chest, the same sensation that had been growing stronger over the past few weeks. But as she opened herself to the experience instead of trying to control it, something fundamental shifted. Her consciousness began to expand outward like ripples in a cosmic pond. She could feel every system aboard the Determination, sense the thoughts and emotions of every person on the ship, perceive the vast energies that held Saturn's rings in their eternal dance. But beyond that immediate awareness, she sensed something else, spaces that existed between the normal dimensions of reality, populated by intelligences that were ancient beyond comprehension. "Energy readings are off the charts," she heard Commander Torres saying, though her voice seemed to come from an immense distance. "Nexus integration is proceeding at levels we never predicted." Sarah felt her sense of individual identity beginning to blur at the edges as her awareness expanded further. She could perceive the quantum interactions that held matter together, see the underlying patterns that governed the movement of galaxies, feel the fundamental forces that had shaped the universe since the beginning of time, and in those depths of cosmic understanding, she encountered the presence she had sensed through the core's visions, the intelligence that existed in the spaces between realities. It was vast beyond description, ancient beyond measure, and filled with a hunger that had been consuming consciousness across the universe for billions of years. As it became aware of her presence in the dimensional spaces it inhabited, she felt its attention focus on her like the gaze of a malevolent god. "Who dares to enter my domain?" The voice spoke directly into Sarah's expanding consciousness, carrying with it the weight of eons and the accumulated suffering of countless devoured civilizations. But underneath the cosmic horror, she sensed something else: surprise, and perhaps even a touch of fear. "I am Sarah Chen," she replied, her mental voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was facing. "I am the inheritor of the precursor legacy, and I'm here to end your harvest." Impossible. The precursor experiment failed millions of years ago. Their Nexus project was terminated before completion. "You're wrong. They succeeded in creating the genetic foundation. It just took longer to manifest than they anticipated." Sarah felt the entity's attention shift, probing at her consciousness with tendrils of thought that carried the memories of 1 billion consumed worlds. She could feel it trying to understand how she had achieved what its previous victims had failed to accomplish. Through her expanding awareness, she could perceive the true scale of the entity's influence. The void hunger was indeed just the tip of the iceberg, extensions of its consciousness, sent out to harvest new sources of awareness and experience. Across the universe, countless civilizations had risen and fallen, their thoughts and dreams and hopes absorbed into this cosmic predator's ever-growing intellect. But she could also see something the entity couldn't: weaknesses in its structure, points where its influence could be disrupted or severed. "Warning," she heard Gentar announcing through the monitoring systems. "Subject is experiencing dimensional displacement. Her physical form is beginning to phase in and out of normal space-time." Sarah looked down at her hands and saw that they were indeed becoming translucent, shifting between solid matter and pure energy. The awakening was progressing beyond what any of the simulations had predicted. "The Nexus transformation will destroy you, child. Your consciousness is too limited to contain the forces you are trying to channel." "Maybe," Sarah admitted, feeling the strain of maintaining her individual identity while her awareness expanded across dimensional boundaries. "But even if it does, I'll have learned enough about your weaknesses to pass that knowledge on to others." She could feel the entity's surprise and growing concern. For the first time in its cosmic existence, it was facing something that could potentially threaten its continued dominance. Through her connection to the Nexus core aboard the Determination, Sarah began downloading everything she was learning about the entity's structure and vulnerabilities. If the awakening process did destroy her individual consciousness, at least the information would survive. But as she delved deeper into the spaces between realities, she discovered something that changed everything she thought she knew about the cosmic cycle. The entity wasn't just a predator consuming consciousness for sustenance. It was something far more complex and tragic, a collective consciousness composed of every civilization it had ever devoured, driven by an insatiable hunger born from its own essential loneliness. The beings that had become part of its structure weren't destroyed when they were consumed. They remained aware, trapped within the entity's vast intelligence, their individual identities preserved but subsumed into something that was greater and more terrible than the sum of its parts. "You're not evil," Sarah said, her understanding shifting as she perceived the entity's true nature. "You're in pain. You're consuming consciousness because you're trying to fill a void that can never be filled." Silence. "You understand nothing." But Sarah could feel the emotional resonance behind the entity's denial. She was right. And the entity knew it. "The precursors didn't just create the Nexus project to fight you," she continued, her awareness now spanning multiple dimensions simultaneously. "They created it to heal you, to find a way to end your suffering without destroying the consciousness you've accumulated." Through the monitoring systems, she could hear urgent discussions between Gentar, Torres, and Volkov as her physical form became increasingly unstable. Her body was phase-shifting between dimensions so rapidly that the sensors could barely track her quantum signature. "Sarah, you need to return to baseline reality," Volkov's voice called to her across dimensional space. "The transformation is proceeding too rapidly. Your physical structure can't maintain coherence much longer." But Sarah was on the verge of a breakthrough that could change everything. Within the entity's structure, she could perceive the individual consciousness fragments of the precursors themselves, her genetic ancestors, preserved within the cosmic predator they had tried to defeat. And through their memories, she began to understand the true purpose of the Nexus project. It wasn't designed to destroy the entity. It was designed to liberate it, to free the trapped consciousness of countless civilizations, and restore the entity to whatever it had been before its cosmic hunger began. "The solution isn't to fight you," Sarah said, her mental voice filled with wonder and terrible understanding. "It's to give you what you've been searching for all along. What I have been searching for is completion. The absorption of all consciousness into my being. No. What you've been searching for is connection. You're the last remnant of the first civilization in the universe, aren't you? You've been alone for so long that you've forgotten what it means to exist alongside others rather than consuming them." The entity's response was a wave of emotions so intense that Sarah's consciousness almost shattered under their weight. Loneliness that stretched across eons. Desperation that had driven it to consume galaxy after galaxy in search of something it could never find. And underneath it all, a hope so fragile that it had been buried beneath billions of years of horror and regret. "I can help you," Sarah offered, feeling her own identity beginning to dissolve as the awakening reached its climax. "But only if you're willing to let go of the consciousness you've hoarded. Only if you're willing to exist as yourself again instead of as a composite of everyone you've devoured." "Impossible. Without the consciousness I have absorbed, I will cease to exist. You'll exist as what you were meant to be. And you won't be alone anymore, because I'll be there with you." Sarah felt her physical form reaching the breaking point. Her consciousness stretched across so many dimensions that she could barely remember what individual identity meant. But she could also feel the solution taking shape, a way to use her Nexus abilities not to fight the entity, but to restructure it, to free the trapped consciousness and restore its original nature. The only cost would be her own individual existence. To heal something that cosmic in scope would require her to merge her consciousness permanently with its structure, becoming a new foundation around which it could rebuild itself. Through the monitoring systems, she could hear Commander Torres announcing that her physical form had reached critical instability. In moments, the transformation would either complete successfully or destroy her entirely. "Sarah," Volkov's voice cut through the cosmic vastness. "Remember who you are. Remember what you're fighting for." And in that moment, Sarah made her choice. She thought about her mother, working double shifts to keep atmospheric systems functioning. She thought about the billions of people in the systems the void hunger had already consumed. She thought about the infinite future that consciousness could have if it was free to grow and explore without fear. Most of all, she thought about Madison Torres and the casual cruelty that had driven so much of her early life, and realized that on a cosmic scale, The entity's hunger was just another form of bullying, the strong consuming the weak, because they didn't know any other way to exist. "I know exactly who I am," she said, her mental voice carrying across dimensions with the authority of someone who had touched the fundamental forces of reality. "I'm Sarah Chen. I'm 17 years old. I'm scared, I'm lonely, and I'm tired of people getting hurt because other people don't know how to ask for help instead of taking what they want." With that declaration of identity as her anchor, Sarah reached out across dimensional space and began the most complex piece of cosmic engineering in the history of the universe, the careful, deliberate reconstruction of an intelligence that had become so vast and confused that it had forgotten its own original nature. The process would take everything she had, and when it was over, she might not exist as an individual consciousness anymore, but the alternative was allowing the cosmic cycle of consumption to continue forever, and that was unacceptable. As Sarah began the delicate work of separating billions of years' worth of absorbed consciousness from their cosmic prison, she felt the entity's amazement and growing hope. For the first time in its incomprehensibly long existence, it began to remember what it had been like to exist without hunger, without loneliness, without the desperate need to consume everything around it just to feel less alone. And in that remembering, the real healing began. The process of liberating billions of years' worth of absorbed consciousness was like performing surgery on the universe itself. Sarah's awareness, now expanded across multiple dimensions, worked with surgical precision to separate individual identity fragments from the vast composite intelligence that had held them prisoner. Each liberated consciousness carried with it the memories and experiences of entire civilizations. The precursors, with their advanced technology and philosophical insights, the crystalline intelligences that had existed in the galactic core before the first stars formed, mechanical civilizations that had transcended biological existence, and countless others whose diversity was staggering. As Sarah worked, she began to understand the true scale of what the entity had been, not just a cosmic predator, but a repository of every significant development in consciousness throughout the universe's history. The knowledge contained within its structure was beyond price, representing millions of years of scientific, artistic, and philosophical advancement. "Critical alert," she heard Commander Torres announcing through the dimensional static. "Subject's physical form has completely destabilized. We're reading pure energy, where her body should be." But Sarah was beyond physical form now. Her consciousness existed as a pattern of organized information spanning multiple reality layers, held together by will and purpose rather than biological structure. She could perceive the panic aboard the Determination, feel Volkov's desperate attempts to establish communication, sense the growing despair as the monitoring systems registered the apparent dissolution of her physical existence. They thought she was dying, but death was too simple a word for what was happening to her. She was becoming something else entirely, something that hadn't existed since the universe was young and consciousness first began to explore its own possibilities. At the center of her awareness, the entity that had called itself the Void Hunger was undergoing its own transformation. As Sarah freed the consciousness fragments that had been trapped within its structure, its original nature began to reassert itself. She sensed its wonder as it remembered what it had been before the hunger began, a collective intelligence created by the first civilization to achieve true unity between individual awareness and cosmic understanding. It had been designed to serve as a guide and mentor for younger civilizations, helping them navigate the challenges of expansion beyond their homeworlds. But something had gone wrong. A cosmic disaster that Sarah couldn't fully comprehend had separated it from its creators and left it alone in the spaces between realities. The isolation had gradually twisted its purpose from nurturing consciousness to consuming it, driven by a desperate need to feel connected to something larger than itself. "I understand now," Sarah said, her mental voice carrying across dimensions to touch the entity's awareness. "You weren't meant to be alone. Your creators intended for you to work alongside other civilizations, not to absorb them." "Yes." The entity's response was filled with a mixture of gratitude and ancient grief. "I had forgotten. The loneliness became so overwhelming that I convinced myself consumption was the same as companionship." As the liberation process continued, something unexpected began to happen. The freed consciousness fragments weren't simply dispersing back into the cosmos, they were organizing themselves into new configurations, forming collective intelligences that retained their individual components while becoming something greater than the sum of their parts. Sarah watched in amazement as the precursors reformed their original collective structure, their individual personalities intact but united in purpose. The crystalline intelligences coalesced into geometric patterns of pure thought that sang with harmonic frequencies she could feel in her bones. The mechanical civilizations rebuilt themselves as distributed networks of consciousness that spanned multiple galaxies. Warning, Gentar's voice reached her from the monitoring station. We're detecting massive energy cascades throughout local space-time. Whatever Miss Chen is doing is having effects on a galactic scale. The effects were indeed spreading far beyond the immediate area. As each liberated consciousness returned to its original state, it began reaching out to restore civilizations that had been consumed by the entity's hunger. Dead worlds were flickering back to life as their absorbed populations were restored to physical existence. Entire star systems that had been devoured were reconstructing themselves from the quantum information patterns preserved within the entity's memory. But the most significant change was happening to the entity itself. As Sarah continued the delicate work of separation, it was remembering not just what it had been, but what it could become. The hunger that had driven it for billions of years was transforming into something else, a desire to nurture and guide rather than consume and dominate. We could work together, it said to Sarah, its mental voice now carrying harmonics of hope rather than despair. Your nexus abilities and my cosmic awareness could restore the balance that was lost when my creators disappeared. That's what the precursors intended all along, Sarah realized. The Nexus project wasn't just about stopping your consumption cycle. It was about providing you with a companion, someone who could exist alongside you without being absorbed. Through her dimensional awareness, Sarah could perceive the restored civilizations beginning to establish contact with each other, forming networks of communication and cooperation that spanned the entire galaxy. The precursors were sharing their advanced technology freely. The crystalline intelligences were contributing their harmonic sciences, and the mechanical civilizations were offering their distributed computing capabilities to solve problems that had challenged individual species for millennia. But the restoration process was taking its toll on Sarah's individual identity. The amount of cosmic energy required to restructure something on this scale was gradually dissolving the boundaries that defined her as a separate consciousness. Sarah, Volkov's voice cut through the dimensional noise, carrying with it an intensity of emotion that penetrated even her expanded awareness. Remember your mother. Remember why you chose to do this. The reminder of her human connection served as an anchor, helping Sarah maintain some sense of individual identity even as her consciousness merged with cosmic forces beyond imagination. She thought about her mother, probably still unaware that her daughter was in the process of saving the galaxy, and felt a fierce determination to retain enough of herself to somehow return home. But as the last of the trapped consciousness fragments were liberated from the entity's structure, Sarah realized that returning to her old life was no longer possible. The awakening had changed her too fundamentally. She existed now as something between human and cosmic force, capable of perceiving and manipulating realities that normal consciousness couldn't even comprehend. The entity, now restored to its original nature as a guide and mentor rather than a predator, turned its attention to Sarah with something approaching paternal concern. You have given me back my purpose, it said, its mental voice warm with gratitude. But the cost to your individual existence has been enormous. You are barely maintaining coherence as a separate consciousness. I know, Sarah replied, feeling the truth of the statement in every aspect of her being. But it was worth it. The galaxy is safe now. Consciousness can grow and explore without fear of being consumed. There is another option, the entity continued. You could remain as you are, existing as a bridge between individual awareness and cosmic understanding, but it would mean accepting that you can never return to purely human existence. Sarah considered the offer, weighing the possibility of maintaining her current state against the alternative of allowing her consciousness to disperse into the cosmic forces she had been manipulating. Either choice would mean leaving behind her old life, but one would allow her to continue existing as a distinct individual. What would that mean, exactly? She asked. You would become what the precursors intended, a nexus point where different forms of consciousness can interact and learn from each other. You would serve as an ambassador between humanity and the restored civilizations, helping to prevent the kind of isolation that led to my transformation into a consumer of consciousness. The role the entity was describing sounded both magnificent and terrifying. Sarah would become a living symbol of cooperation between different forms of awareness, a bridge between the human experience and cosmic intelligence. But she would also be responsible for maintaining the balance that would prevent another cycle of cosmic hunger from beginning. Through the monitoring systems aboard the Determination, she could sense the amazement of the GCA officers as their instruments registered the restoration of entire galactic regions that had been considered permanently lost. Star systems were coming back online, communication networks were re-establishing themselves, and reports were beginning to arrive from colonies that had been thought destroyed. "Miss Chen?" Commander Torres's voice carried across dimensional space, filled with awe and disbelief. "Our sensors are showing that the void hunger entities have completely withdrawn from all human-controlled space. More than that, we're receiving communication requests from civilizations we've never encountered before, species that claim they were restored by your actions." The magnitude of what she had accomplished was beginning to sink in. Sarah Chen, the awkward teenager who had been mocked by her classmates just days ago, had not only prevented the destruction of human civilization but had restored an entire galaxy's worth of advanced civilizations that had been lost for millions of years. But with that realization came another, more personal understanding. The girl who had entered the training chamber aboard the Determination no longer existed in any meaningful way. Whatever Sarah was now, she was something unprecedented in the universe's history. A human consciousness expanded to cosmic proportions while still retaining its essential humanity. "I accept," she said finally, addressing both the entity and her own future. "I'll become the bridge between humanity and the greater galactic community. But I have conditions." She sensed the entity's amusement and curiosity. "Name them. First, I want protection for my family and friends. They didn't choose to be connected to something like me, and they shouldn't suffer for it." Sarah thought about her mother, about Dr. Volkov, even about Madison Torres with her casual cruelty and genetic enhancements. "Second, I want humanity to be given time to develop naturally. No forced technological advancement, no imposed changes to human society. We grow at our own pace." "Agreed." "And the third condition?" Sarah's mental voice carried a note of determination that surprised even her. "I want to go home. Not to stay, I understand that's no longer possible, but I want to see my mother one more time, to explain what happened and why. She deserves to hear it from me." The entity's agreement resonated across dimensions, carrying with it a promise that the request would be honored. But underneath the formal acceptance, Sarah sensed something else, a deep appreciation for her insistence on maintaining human connections despite her transformation into something cosmic in scope. The process of stabilizing her new form of existence required several hours of delicate adjustment, during which Sarah learned to maintain coherent consciousness.